rate your Barbie?
Thanks, Barbie. Gosh, this night is just perfect. It's perfectly perfect.
And you look so beautiful, Barbie.
Thanks, Barbie. I feel so beautiful.
So do I. This is the best day ever.
It is the best day ever, and so is yesterday, and so is tomorrow, and so is the day after tomorrow, and even Wednesdays, and every day from now until forever. Do you guys ever think about dying?
So this is really iconic moment in the movie. If you have watched it, you know exactly what happens after. If you haven't watched it, I'm not going to spoil it, but I'm just going to say that it also really represents what happens in, I feel like, every individual life when at a certain point there are deeper things that are hidden from the surface, from the consciousness, actually come up to the surface, and once they become exposed to our consciousness, we kind of start to ask those deeper questions. And what's really interesting about this specific example and this specific clip is the split between the external and internal realities, when internally there is those deeper thoughts and she expresses them externally, and that moment of, you know, a pause in music and almost like fear and surprise in all of her friends, people's faces around, represents misunderstanding or the disalignment between the external and internal.
I don't know why I just said that. I'm just dying to dance.
Mahkok te kasho. Pasta wilatio.
Mainatik.
Sak. Down. Kak saki. Le tiob saya tiob lelo. Tawila. Saki lo. Belko haanel. Lelela kuyo kutikusta. Lelela chokan. Kaskuta. Wetel nakila kusta.
I wanted to use this clip and also another movie, animated movie called Puss in Boots, The Last Wish, so the newest one, to explore this idea of death, but also ego death, and the things that where we are being confronted with difficult topics that sometimes we want to avoid, but it's a certain truth that comes to the surface. And I feel like in Barbie movie, it doesn't really go deep in the explanation of death itself at all. It goes deeper into those issues that were kind of kept at bay and not looked at or not talked about. So, and I feel like they're obviously very much relevant to what the Barbie's movie is all about, though the issues of gender and patriarchy and those topics. But a lot of times in lives, yes, it could be death itself, or it could be other things, right? Like those things that we try to avoid, but there comes a moment when we're no longer able to.
Puss and Boots. Where am I?
Puss and Boots. How do I say this? You died. You are down to your last life. My prescription, no more adventures for you. You need to retire. And remember, Puss, death comes for us all.
Retire. You are too good looking to retire.
And really, I want to talk about what happens after that moment comes, and specifically what happens to the psyche, and what follows as the healthy resolution and development. And I think both movies, Barbie and Puss in Boots, they kind of show that healthy development and resolution through a journey to explore in those deeper aspects. Although that exploration in itself, it is motivated by fear, it's motivated by anxiety, it's motivated by that fixation to return something back, to return to how things were before. But that is the conflict, that is the thing, that certain things, once you see them, you're no longer able to unsee them. Once you know, you're no longer able to unknow them, and you cannot keep them out of the consciousness as you have used to. And this is where often the stuckness happens, and the stuckness where, you know, you realize before you even see that resolution, to go on that journey. And Puss in Boots, that's really a good example where you seek to avoid it. So just the avoidance of the triggers, which we often talk about in the present day society. We talk a lot about being triggered and triggers, and so there is this emphasis on avoiding triggers as a response to keep certain things at bay. And I'm not talking about triggers for like complex PTSD, right? I'm talking about triggers, even, you know, we use that word so frivolously, triggers like certain topics, you know, because we haven't resolved that conflict, we haven't fully thought deeply through those things, we haven't confronted our own feelings around it, so kind of go into that avoidance and we build comfort around it. And so Puss in Boots, it shows us that literal comfort, where he goes, he becomes a lab cat, which is like a 360 U-turn to the previous identity that he had, right? Like that kind of adventure, courageous, never afraid of anything, and now he goes and takes on that lifestyle as an attempt to avoid dying, but it's less about dying, but about the feelings and things that it's come up. It's really dealing with the topic of death in the first place, right? And I think that is a good analogy, that physical comfort and death, as we talk about, like in a very physical, visceral, material sense, is a good analogy to a lot of like psychological things that we don't want to confront, right? Sometimes we build this fortress around ourselves, not maybe in a physical sense, but in a psychological sense. So it's not necessarily that you just stay at home and protect yourself from the outside world to that extent, but you protect yourself from the outside world in other behaviors, in avoiding topics, in avoiding people, in avoiding certain things in the name of this new identity. But the identity is really motivated and created on the fear and other feelings which came up at that point of personality, like breakage almost, when things that weren't conscious became conscious. And I feel like we don't talk about that enough, because even me on this channel talk a lot about making unconscious conscious, but what happens after, right? And I feel this is something I have experienced myself in therapy, in psychotherapy, and sometimes therapists overlooked. It's, yes, sure, you might be great at bringing things up to the surface, but once they are there on the surface, there is this huge, very, very important component of integration. And how does this integration happen? And so again, those both movies, they show us that journey of exploration and eventually integration, really through having those experiences. And it's a little like change in values, right, that happens. And even though both characters, like Puss in Boots and Barbie, they both go into their previous world, but they are the ones who are different. And this is also a very important point to emphasize. It's not that we need to change the world around us to that extent that it protects us from ourselves in a way, from our own fears and demons and things that we don't want to deal with, or even like from our perspective it might seem that protecting us from the world itself, but it's not. It's only creates that avoidance. And so it's really about the change that happens in us and the ability to integrate. And the change that happens in us helps us to make changes in that previous world that we had, but the changes, they happen through the way that we show up. I really want to end with this quote that I read a while ago, and I think it really drives this point home. The quote that goes, "Before enlightenment, I chop wood and carry water, and after enlightenment, I chop wood and carry water." And I used to wonder before, I don't know if that makes sense, what does it mean? But I think it really means that. It's not that we really focus on changing the external forces around us and the world. I mean, of course it's important, and it's important if we have the power, like, you know, we still see how much changes happen through the characters going on those quests, deciding to explore certain things, but it's not changing it in a way that, well, now I know this, so I am going to leave based on that fear. It's more like, now I know this, so I do have all these fears and things that come up, but they're really there for me to deeper understand myself and also the world around me, even though it's painful and difficult sometimes, especially with topics like death and things that we really don't want to talk about.